Okay, so Prince William recently opened a locked leather folder bearing the late monarch's personal wax seal, and the document inside essentially drew a permanent line right through the middle of Camilla's royal future. Not her present title, not her dignity, but what that role can actually do and who it can influence once Charles is no longer king. And honestly, the most fascinating part of the scene isn't even the directive itself. It is the fact that Queen Elizabeth sat on this quietly for months, knowing it would eventually have to be delivered by her grandson directly to his own father. Think about the emotional calculus behind a decision like that. She didn't leave it for Charles to discover in a dusty archive after she was gone, hoping nobody would ever find it. She documented it, sealed it, and ensured it would surface at the exact moment the institution needed it most. That isn't a monarch reacting to a crisis. That is a monarch architecting a future she knew would be complex long after she left the room. If you're enjoying this deep dive into real palace dynamics and the hidden mechanics of the crown, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our breaking breakdowns. Now, let's step inside that closed room at Windsor to see how this actually played out. William walked into his father's private study holding that folder. That detail alone tells you this was never meant to be a casual family catch-up over tea. You don't bring a formal legal file to a quiet afternoon chat unless you are about to state something that requires total, unyielding documentation. He placed it on the desk, looked directly at Charles, looked at Camilla, and made it clear that this was duty finally breaking through a sensitive family dynamic. The directive inside stated that Camilla's title of Queen Consort must remain strictly ceremonial, tied exclusively to Charles's lifetime, and never used to exert independent authority or influence over the future monarchy. Right away, you can see the architecture of what Queen Elizabeth was worried about. She wasn't trying to publicly humiliate Camilla. She was building an institutional wall between the present reign and the next one, specifically to guard Catherine's future role as queen before anyone could quietly blur the boundaries. In royal terms, the word ceremonial carries immense weight. It means you stand where you are placed, you carry out official appearances, and you maintain public dignity, but you do not shape policy, you do not guide access, and you do not influence how the next reign is prepared. The text explicitly prohibited Camilla's office from shaping decisions regarding the future queen. That wasn't abstract legal jargon. That was Queen Elizabeth looking at Catherine and deciding her position needed to be shielded in writing before anyone even attempted to challenge it. Charles was visibly devastated as William read the words aloud. He lowered his eyes, staring at his mother's handwriting, unable to offer an immediate defense. Charles has spent decades protecting Camilla from judgment, shielding her from public backlash, and earning her acceptance. He finally secured her place beside him on the throne, only for his mother's final instruction to establish that acceptance had strict limits. That is a very specific kind of pain. It isn't outright rejection, it's containment. And containment is far harder to fight because it is framed entirely as reasonable institutional duty. Camilla sat frozen as the weight of the document settled over the study. She has survived decades of intense public scrutiny, but this wasn't a tabloid story or a public poll. This was the late monarch whose approval she worked so carefully to earn, explicitly setting the legal boundaries of her reach. William then closed the folder, and the sound echoed through the room like one era closing before the next could even begin. He explained that this instruction had been kept within a very tight circle to avoid a premature confrontation, but added that there was one crucial detail left to confront: the past consultation that forced Queen Elizabeth to draft this document in the first place. Every major royal crisis has a single, quiet moment that seems minor at the time until history turns back and points directly at it. For Queen Elizabeth, that moment occurred during a private title consultation at Windsor, following a memorial service, when emotions were already running high. Title consultations are where the real power struggles happen behind the scenes, because whoever controls the official language controls the perception of power. During that meeting, advisors close to Camilla pushed for legal phrasing that would move her status closer to shared sovereign authority. The late Queen listened silently. Charles tried to soften the tone to keep the discussion from turning tense, but then a single phrase was introduced: shared royal authority. The king, then Prince of Wales, knew instantly that the line had been crossed. William, sitting nearby, watched his grandmother set down her pen without finishing her notes. That small act froze the entire room. Queen Elizabeth wasn't angry in a loud way. She was cold, steady, and strategic. She realized that if Camilla's status expanded into authority, the future line of the crown could be clouded by competing claims of influence during the next transition. Right after that meeting ended, the late Queen privately dictated the exact directive William was now holding. When William finished explaining the origin of the document, the atmosphere in the study shifted completely. William wasn't acting as a resenting stepson, he was acting as the future king, ensuring the institution arrives intact for his own reign. If Camilla's role stretched beyond ceremony, Catherine's future place could be drawn into uncertainty before her time even arrived. Charles felt the institutional logic, but he also felt the personal sting. He looked at Camilla, his silence communicating what his voice couldn't. He loved her, but he was bound by a throne built on rules far older than any private promise. Camilla gripped the edge of her chair quietly, processing the realization that respect did not equal command. Catherine, sitting beside William, watched the exchange with quiet concern, aware that her future was being defended at the cost of a deep family wound. A senior courtier then moved a second briefing paper across the table, shifting the crisis from private words into immediate operational reality. The fallout didn't wait for public statements. It hit palace administrative routines the very next morning. Briefing schedules were altered, access to long-term transition meetings was restricted, and protocol documents were updated. Camilla arrived for a scheduled court meeting only to find the agenda narrowed and key senior advisors absent. William's office called it legal clarity, ensuring that all succession symbolism was routed strictly through Kensington Palace and the King's private office, completely excluding Camilla's administrative team. Charles closed his briefing folder sharply in front of aides later that day, frustrated to see private legal directives turning into administrative restrictions. He could defend Camilla with personal devotion, but he could not openly defy the late Queen's written mandate without undermining the very crown he wore. Camilla accepted the reality in silence, continuing her scheduled public appearances with composure, fully aware that while her public honor remained untouched, her institutional reach had been definitively drawn. In the end, the revelation didn't fracture the monarchy, it clarified it, proving that when personal devotion conflicts with the future of the crown, institutional duty always has the final word. Okay, so that precise understanding reached between William and Charles set off a chain reaction that reached far beyond Camilla's title, exposing a second hidden legal battle that had been quietly building behind palace walls. While the world was focused on the constitutional boundaries surrounding the Queen Consort, Prince Edward's legal team formally stepped forward with signed documentation confirming that Edward legally inherits private assets, estate guarantees, and trust allocations that Charles had spent years trying to delay and withhold. If you are tracking how these quiet institutional maneuvers reshape the inner circle of the royal family, take a moment to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our breaking deep dives into the crown. To truly understand how this second crisis unfolded, you have to look at the quiet promises made in the final years of Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth's lives. For decades, Charles had operated under the assumption that once he became sovereign, he would hold exclusive, unquestioned authority over the slimming down of the monarchy. That included reallocating royal properties, restructuring private family trusts, and deciding which family members retained access to key estates like Bagshot Park. Charles believed he could unilaterally modify those arrangements to fit his vision of a streamlined, cost-effective court. What Charles didn't realize was that Prince Edward had quietly prepared for this exact scenario years ago. Edward understood that family verbal agreements often evaporate the moment a new reign begins and personal priorities shift.
Rather than relying on his brother's goodwill, Edward worked directly with senior estate attorneys and the late Queen's personal legal advisors to lock down his inheritance through binding legal covenants and irrevocable private trusts. Now imagine the moment that reality hit the king's desk. A senior courtier walked into Charles's private study and laid out the legal brief submitted by Edward's representation. The documents contained certified signatures from both Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, establishing that Edward's rights to his estate allocations were contractually protected under property law. It was an airtight legal framework, specifically engineered so that no future monarch, not even the king himself, could override, delay, or reclaim those assets. Charles stared at the paperwork in complete silence. He had spent years trying to centralize control over the royal family's private wealth, only to discover that his mother and father had built an impenetrable legal wall around Edward's future. Edward hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't gone to the media, and he hadn't caused a public scene. He simply let the law speak for itself. When Prince William was briefed on the development, he recognized the strategic brilliance of his uncle's move immediately. Edward had played the long game with total discretion. While Charles had focused on exercising royal prerogative, Edward had secured his family's financial and residential stability under unbreakable contract law, leaving the king with zero legal leverage to fight back without causing a massive, embarrassing legal challenge inside the family. Faced with certified legal documents and no room to maneuver, Charles was forced to sign off on the confirmation, quietly surrendering the estate rights he had fought to withhold for years. Between William enforcing Queen Elizabeth's strict constitutional limits on Camilla and Edward utilizing the late Queen's legal paperwork to protect his inheritance, King Charles was given a stark, undeniable reality check. The late Queen Elizabeth II's final written decisions still hold total, absolute command over the House of Windsor.
Okay, so when you step back and look at the whole picture, these two distinct legal revelations tell you everything you need to know about how Queen Elizabeth II managed the future of the British monarchy. She did not leave the stability of the institution to chance, nor did she assume that emotion and family loyalty would naturally resolve complex constitutional issues. She foresaw the exact pressure points that would emerge during King Charles's reign and put binding, written safeguards in place long before those problems could spill out into public disarray. If you found this deep dive into palace strategy insightful, take a second to hit that subscribe button so you stay tuned for our upcoming coverage on royal history and constitutional dynamics. For Prince William and Catherine, the outcome of these quiet legal battles established absolute clarity for their own coming reign. Catherine's future role as queen is protected from any overlapping claims of authority, and the path for the next transition remains entirely clear of administrative ambiguity. William demonstrated that as Prince of Wales and future king, his primary loyalty lies with the continuity and integrity of the crown itself. He was willing to navigate a painful moment with his father to ensure that the rules governing the monarchy remained unbroken. And for King Charles, these events served as a profound lesson in the realities of sovereign power. While a king holds immense ceremonial authority, he remains bound by the legal frameworks, private trusts, and constitutional precedents established by the monarchs who came before him. His personal devotion to Camilla and his vision for a streamlined royal family both had to yield to the explicit, recorded wishes of Queen Elizabeth II. And as for Queen Camilla and Prince Edward, each found their permanent place within this long-term structure. Camilla continues her public service with dignity, fully aware that her ceremonial role carries honor without governing reach over the next generation. Prince Edward secured his rightful inheritance, proving that quiet legal foresight carries far more weight in the palace than temporary administrative standing.
In the end, what happened behind those closed doors at Windsor was not a story of conflict, but a story of institutional discipline. Queen Elizabeth II built a reign defined by duty, and through these final written instructions, she ensured that duty will continue to govern the House of Windsor for generations to come.